In this quick Python tutorial for beginners, you're going to learn all the essentials. We'll install Python, write your first program, and walk through variables, lists, loops, functions, and all of the core building blocks. And by the end, we'll even put it into a small program that actually does something. And this is all from scratch. So if you've never written a line of code before, don't worry. Let's dive in. So the first thing we need to do is install Python itself. So open up your browser, you can go over to python.org, and then you want to go to the download section. For downloads, you can just find the most recent download here, so Python Install Manager, or you can install the standalone version. Now, I recommend that you go with the standalone version because it's going to be a little bit simpler, and you can install this on Mac, Windows, or Linux. So I'm going to press this, I'm going to download it, and then once it's downloaded, I'm just going to double click on it so that I can install Python and have that on my system. Now, just one quick note here, if you see this little checkbox that says Add Python exe to path, just go ahead and check that. It's going to make your life a lot easier later, and then just go install now, choose all of the default options, run through the installation, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so now that Python is installed, we need a place to actually write our code. Now for that, we're going to use an editor called VS Code. Now it's free, it's what most people use, and it's great for beginners. So what we're going to do is head over to code.visualstudio.com, and we're just going to download the newest version for our operating system. So you can just press the big button right here, and then it should start downloading. Now once it's downloaded, same thing, double click it, install it, run through all of the default options, and then simply open up that application, and you should be brought to a page that looks something like this. Yours might be a slightly different color. Don't worry about that too much. Now, right away, what we're going to do in VS Code is we're just going to create a new folder, and we're going to work inside of there so we don't lose any of our work. It's very straightforward to do this. You're going to find the File menu here from the top left-hand side. You're going to go to Open Folder. From Open Folder, you can select a location, like your desktop, and just make a new folder. I'm just going to call mine Demo, okay? And then I'm going to make sure that it's selected, and I'm going to press Select Folder. Now, once I'm inside of here, you're going to see this kind of tab on the left-hand side will open. And keep in mind, you can move all of the windows and navigate through this editor kind of naturally as you would assume. So this is the Explorer view, and this is where we can make files. But quickly, before we go any further, we're going to go over to this puzzle piece looking icon, which should be on the left-hand side. It's called Extensions. From here, we're just going to search for Python, and we're going to install the Python extension, which will give some capabilities in this editor. So if I scroll down, you can see the official Python extension here from Microsoft. Just go ahead and install that if you don't already have it. It may refresh or restart the IDE or VS Code, and then you can go back to this view, and we are ready to go. So we need to begin here by making a new file. So to do that, I'm going to find this Explorer view on the left-hand side, and I'm going to press this button which says New File. From here, I'm going to type in the name of the file, and for now, we can just call this demo, and then it's very important that you end this in .py. .py stands for .python, and this is the extension that all of our Python coding files are going to end in. So anytime you want to write Python, needs to end in .py. So we're going to do that, press enter, and it should bring us into the file here. So we now have a Python file. It's open in our editor view, which means we can see the file. But if for some reason we close this, we can just double click it on the left-hand side and it will open up again. So now let's write our first line of Python code, which is going to be print hello world, exactly like this. And notice the double quotation marks. You can also use single quotation marks. Now this is our first line of Python code. We're using a function. This function is called print. And what print does is just output something to the console or to the terminal. So it's kind of how we can see what the code is actually doing. And the text that we put here is just hello world, which is kind of the famous first sentence or first words that you always say when you're running code. And speaking of which, we need to run the code. So we're just writing it right now, but if we want to execute it and see what it does, we need to run it. Now, in order to run it, you can press this little play button right here, which says Run Python File. When you do that, it should open it up in the terminal down here, and you should see the output of hello world. Now, it is possible if this button doesn't work. For most of you, it will. If it doesn't work, you can manually execute the Python file by simply going into your terminal. The way you can open that is you can drag it up from the bottom of the screen, or you can press Control plus backtick on your keyboard or Command plus backtick. And what you can do is type Python and then the name of your Python file that you created here, which is demo.py. Okay, and if you do that, it will execute the code for you directly. So just Python, name of your Python file, that's it, and it will execute it, but for most of you, just press this button. Okay, so printing text is cool, but let's make this a lot more useful with variables. Now, a variable is basically just a container where you can store something so you can access it later on. So look at the code on my screen. These are 4 variables, and I want to break this down for you. So on the left, we have the variable name. Then we have an equal sign, and then we have the value that we're storing. And notice that we have a few different types of data here. The first value that we have here is a string. Now that's what's called in Python, and anything that's wrapped in double or single quotation marks is considered a string. There's a few others as well, but this is the most basic. Next, we have a number or an int or an integer because it's a whole number. And this could be negative, it could be 0 as well, and it could be a really big number. Next, we have a float or a floating point value. That's because it has a decimal point at the end. Even something like 5.0 would be considered a float because it has that decimal value. Then we have is learning, and this is what's called a Boolean. A Boolean is just one of two values, which is false or true, like 0 or 1 if you're familiar with binary. And the nice thing with Python is that you don't need to tell it what each type of the variable is, it will just figure it out for you. So anyways, if I want to use these values, I can reference them. So I can say something like print name, and if I run the code, notice we get the name Tim. If I wanted to print multiple things, I could print name and then age, and notice I get Tim 26. And if I wanted to make maybe a sentence, I could say is, and then I can do a comma, and if I run this again, you're going to see Tim is 26. There we go. Now, if you're curious what type a variable is, you can also use this type function, and you can put something like name, and you're going to notice that we get str, which stands for string. And if I did something like height, and I run this here, you'll notice that we get float, right? Because it has that floating point value. We'll talk more about that later, but this is the basics on variables and their types. Now, real quick, before we keep going here, for this video, I've partnered with DataCamp to give you a quick high-level intro to Python that's aimed on getting you started. But if you're actually serious about learning this, I really recommend DataCamp's Python Programming Fundamentals track. Now, it's built for complete beginners, and it walks you through everything that we're doing today, except with real data sets and hands-on exercises that you do yourself in your browser. So instead of just watching me type here, you're actually writing the code yourself, and that's the part that's going to make it stick. And once you've got the basics down, if you want to take it further, you can check out the Associate Python Developer track, which is designed to get you job ready. Now, it covers the more advanced stuff, so things like writing clean code, functions, working with real data, and the kind of problems you'd actually run into on the job. And here's the best part. DataCamp's tracks also prepare you for their Python certification, so you can walk away with an industry-recognized credential that you can put straight on your resume and your LinkedIn. So you're not just learning, you're getting real practice and working towards an accomplishment or a certification that you can show off. Now, I've used DataCamp myself for years. It's worth it. Go check them out, and you can get 25% off with my link below, and I'll have both tracks linked down there in case you want to check them out. Anyways, let's get back into Python. So let's do a little bit more with strings, because you're going to use these a lot, especially for your first programs. Now, one thing that you can do is you can join strings together. Now, that's called concatenation, and it's effectively like adding them together. So have a look at this code here. You can see that I'm using the plus sign to kind of stick these strings together. So I have first name plus, notice this is another string because it's combined with, single quotes or double quotes, and there's kind of a little space inside of here. And then I have another plus and then last name. Now take a guess at what we're going to get, but you'll notice that when I run this, I get Tim space Smith. Now you can do this with all kinds of strings. I can add an S at the end. And notice, because I didn't put a space this time, I put an S, we get Smiths. So when you concatenate strings, kind of just think of like squishing them together, which means if you want to add them and you want to have a space, you've got to manually put that space in there like you see here. Now, fun fact, with the print statement, you can put a comma and put multiple things and they'll automatically get separated with a space, but really behind the scenes, it's doing the same thing that you're seeing here, which is concatenating these strings. Let's have another look at how we can work with strings. So check out this example here. We've got our first name, we've got our age, and we're using something fancy called an F string. An F string lets us embed variables directly inside of a string, so we don't need to go through the mess of kind of adding them all together and figuring out that formula. Whenever you put an F before a string, it allows you to embed variables or expressions, which we can talk about later, with curly braces. So I can say, hi, my name is first name, that's going to reference the variable Tim, and I am age years old. And this is a lot easier than adding them together. So if I run the code here, you can see that we get the result. Hi, my name is Tim, and I am 26 years old. So feel free to use concatenation and F strings, whatever is easier for you. Now, so far, everything you've seen has been hard-coded by us. So what I want to do now is make our program actually talk to the person who's using it, which can be dynamic, and we're going to do that using something called the input function. Now have a look at my code right here. You can see that I have a variable, I have an equal sign, and then I have input. Now input is exactly what it says. It's going to get input from the user. So when I run this code, you notice that it's actually waiting for my input. It says, what is your name? And then I can start typing something right here. So I can type Tim, and it says, hello, Tim. So if you want to grab input from the user, you use this input function. But let me show you another example. Maybe you're going to get creative and you're going to do something like this, where you're going to ask the user what their age is, and maybe you want to add 1 to it, right, and print that out. Watch what happens here. If I type 26, notice that we actually get an error. Now this is important. It's going to happen all the time, so don't worry if an error message pops up. In fact, you should probably read it because they're really quite useful to tell you what's going to happen, especially in Python. And you can see that the error is a type error, and it says can only concatenate string, not int, to string. And it's pointing to this line right here. The reason for this is any input that we get from the input function is of type string. Now, whenever you're doing operations like adding, subtracting, multiplying, you can only do those on the same type or kind of the same family of types. So numbers, strings, etc. So I can't add a string, which is what this comes in as by default, even though I typed a number, to user H, because anything from input is always considered a string. If I want to add these together, what I can do is use something fancy called this int function, which will convert this string type into an int. So if I run this now, and I type 26, we get 27 because we've taken the string and converted it to an int. Not going to go too much further there. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with type conversions, but understand the type really matters. So at this point, every variable that we write is just holding one value. But a lot of times you want to store a whole bunch of things together and kind of group them into something we would call a list. So have a look at this. This is how you make a list in Python, and you can see that we have 3 different objects here. We just use these square brackets, and then we can write pretty much anything that we could put inside of a variable directly inside of here, as long as we separate it with a comma. And the interesting thing about lists is that you can reference the objects that are inside of them. So for example, I can print the groceries, and then I can use this index operator at index 0, because with computers, we always start counting at 0. Now when I do this, you notice that I get apples, because that's index 0, which is the first position in the list. If I do 1, I'm going to get bread. And if I do 2, I'm going to get milk. So these are called the indices or the indexes of a list. You start counting at 0 and you go up by 1, and that's the position of those objects that you can reference and use. But the thing is, I don't have to keep the list the same size. I can delete an object, I can add an object. So for example, I can use this fancy thing called a method and add maybe, I don't know, a carrot to my list, and then I can print it out. So if I run the code now, you can see that we have apples, bread, milk, and carrot because we've appended to or added to the end of this list. There's a lot of other list methods you can use, but understand they can grow and change and shrink in size, and you can reference all of the objects by their position or just look at it as a whole, which is super, super useful. And by the way, if you want to have a look at how long a list is or the number of objects inside of it, you can use this cool function called len, and it will tell you, in this case, the length is 4 because we added that carrot object. Now let's give our program some decision making. So it can do different things depending on the situation. Now that's where the if statement comes in. So have a look at the code on screen. You can see we say if age is greater than or equal to 18, we're going to print this thing. Otherwise, we're going to do this. Now the else is effectively a catch-all. So what that means is that if this thing is not true, we go into this other block right here. Now what I want you to pay attention to is the spacing that we see. Python is a unique language, and the way that I have this laid out is super important. You'll notice that I have this print statement kind of 4 spaces or 1 tab, you can use the tab key, over, and that indicates that it's inside of this if block. To give you an idea of what I mean, let's say I were to remove this and I put a print statement here. This is the if statement, this is detached from it. It's not connected whatsoever because it's not indented. It's not in this kind of new block. Now, I know this is a little bit confusing, and this is where, for 15 minutes, we can't explain everything in depth, but this right here is what we call a condition. We're checking is age greater than or equal to 18. We could also check, is it equal to? That's 2 equal signs. Is it not equal to? That's not equal to. There's a bunch of other ones you can check out, right? So if we say greater than or equal to 18, we're going to print, you are an adult. Then we have an else statement. So if this thing wasn't true, if the age wasn't greater than or equal to 18, we go to the else and we do this. So let me show you. If I run the code, you can see that it says, let's run it again. You are an adult. And if I make this smaller, so 17, you can see it says you are a minor. Now we can actually adjust this and go even crazier by using this thing called elif. And if we run the code now, you can see it says minor. If we change this to be, 76, it says senior. If we change it to be 45, it says adult. Now we've used an elif statement here, and what we do is we just go in order. So we check, is this the case? Okay, if it's not the case, we check this thing. If it's not the case, we go to this. The else is the catch-all, which will always occur at the end. It's not mandatory. You don't need to have it, and you can have kind of any combination of these as long as you start it with an if. But let's move to the next section. Next up, we have loops. Now a loop lets you repeat something without writing it out 100 times. Now remember our groceries list. Let's say I wanted to print out every single item on its own line of code. Well, instead of writing each one for one, I can use something called a for loop. A for loop is something that will run a predetermined number of times, while as a while loop, which is something else that we can do, runs based on a condition, but we're not going to look at that in this video. So this for loop right here, if I print it out, you can see that it's going to print all 3 of the items in our list. The way that this works is that I write the keyword for, I put some variable, which is going to represent the items that I'm kind of looping through or looking at, and I put in and then some object, in this case, this is the list that we're looking at that I want to loop through. But you can also loop through strings, you can loop through other data types, and you can get a lot more complicated, obviously, than what I can cover in 15 minutes. But the idea is that this item variable is going to hold all of the values that are in this list, and it will change as we go through each item. So we'll start by looking at apple. We'll print it out. Then we're going to look at milk. We print it out. Then we're going to look at butter. We print it out, and we loop 3 times because there's 3 objects inside of this list. That's how for works. Now, rather than just looping based on some list, we can also loop based on some numbers, which I want to show you. So for example, if we change the code to this, we can use a function called the range function. Range lets us loop based on a number, so in this case, we're looping 5 times. The number you put here is the number that your loop will stop at, but not include. So if I run this, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because range creates this sequence from 0 up to 4. Number is then equal to all of those values, and we can process it and print it out. All right, so the last core concept to cover, and this is a really big one, is functions. Now, a function is a reusable block of code that you can run whenever you want. Now, we've actually been using functions this whole time, like print, input, len, range. Those are all functions that are built into Python. So to make a function, we use the keyword def, we give the function a name, we use a set of parentheses, and we put anything called a parameter, which is a value that you can dynamically pass into the function. We then have a colon, and we have anything inside of the function in an indented block. So same thing, those 3 lines are a part of the function. This line is not because it's not indented inside of that block. Okay, so let's go back to our original function. Now, in order to call the function, you simply type the name of the function, and you pass it any required parameters. So for example, I say Tim like this, and if I run the code, you can see it says hello Tim. And the beauty of functions is that you can reuse them. So if I want to say hi to Tim and Joe and Sarah, I can do that by running the code like this. And notice we get the same thing. So if we had some complicated logic, we could put it in here and keep reusing it rather than having to write it multiple times. This, what's kind of the variable in the function, is called a parameter. And this, what we're passing to the function when we use it, is called an argument. Now here's another example of a function that makes a little bit more sense. This function adds 2 numbers together, and you can see that when I run this, I get 8. So I call add with 5 and 3. The result of that function gets stored in the variable, and then I can print out the result. Okay, so now it's time to bring all of this together into a super simple Python program that uses a lot of the features that you've seen. So what I did is I wrote a function. The function is calculate tip, and this is a reusable piece of code that we can use multiple times. Now what we do is we ask for a bill and then the percentage of tip that we want to tip, right, or that we want to use. We calculate the tip by using some arithmetic in Python. So we use the asterisk, which stands for multiply, and we use the slash, which stands for divide, and then we use the parentheses to kind of separate out when these operations should happen, just like in standard math. We then use this return statement, and the return statement returns a value back to wherever the function was called. We then create 2 variables, bill amount and tip percent. We ask the user to enter those, which we'll look at in a second. We convert those into a float. The reason we use a float is because we want to be able to capture anything like 23.9 or 15.5%, whereas an int is just going to be a whole number. So it would just round off and give us 16, 17, etc. Then we calculate the tip. So we say tip is equal to calculate tip. We give the bill amount and the tip percentage, and then we calculate the total, and we print it out with an F string. So let's have a quick look at what the program does here. What was your bill? $100. What do you want to tip? 20%. And you can see that it calculates it, and we get $120. Feel free to study this code and look at it or adjust it on your own. And I would highly encourage you to start writing some Python code so you can get these concepts a lot better. Okay, so that's it. You just installed Python, wrote your first program, learned about variables, strings, input lists, conditional loops, and functions, and honestly, you just saw the entire foundation of the entire language in just a few minutes. Now, of course, there's a lot more stuff to go through. If you want to look at that, check out my channel, or go check out those DataCamp tracks that I linked below if you want that hands-on practice. Anyways, guys, that's all that I have for you here. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.